On a February night in 1966, a man sat alone in a Manhattan office at 2 in the morning staring at a lie detector. There was no suspect in the room. The only other living thing was a houseplant in the corner, and he'd just clipped the machine's electrodes onto one of its leaves. Then, on a whim, he pictured setting that leaf on fire. He never touched it. He never even got out of his chair. But the instant that thought crossed his mind, the needle jumped, scrawling out the same jagged spike the machine drew when a terrified human being was caught in a lie. The man was Cleve Backster, and for the next 50 years, that single jump of a needle would haunt one of the strangest questions in science. Do plants scream when you hurt them? Tonight we're going to answer it, and the real answer is stranger than the myth. Here's the thing about this question. It never really goes away. Snip a stem, tear a leaf, mow a lawn on a summer afternoon, and somewhere in the back of your mind a small voice asks whether the plant felt that, whether that fresh-cut grass smell is actually the botanical version of a cry for help. It sounds ridiculous. Plants don't have mouths, they don't have brains, and they can't run or flinch or make a sound, or so we always assumed. But the question keeps coming back for a reason, because deep down, there's an instinct that says a living thing being cut open should do something. And for decades, one man's experiment made it look like they did exactly that. To understand where the truth lives, we have to start with him, because Cleve Backster is the reason this myth exploded across the world in the first place, and he's also the reason so much of what you've heard about it is wrong. Cleve Backster wasn't some hippie with a crystal collection. That's what makes his story so hard to shake. He was a serious professional. He'd trained interrogators for the CIA and the FBI. He'd spent his life reading the tiny electrical flickers of the human body under questioning, and he developed a polygraph scoring method so respected it's still referenced in the field today. When Cleve Backster looked at a squiggle on a chart, people trusted what he saw. So when his plant made that squiggle, he didn't laugh it off. He got obsessed. He started running tests. He'd threaten the plant and watch the needle. He tried to fake it out, pretending he was going to burn a leaf without meaning it, and he claimed the plant could tell the difference between a real intention and a bluff. Then he went further. He set up an experiment where live brine shrimp were dropped into boiling water in another room at random times chosen by a machine so no human knew when it would happen. And Backster reported that every time those shrimp died, his plants reacted. He had a name ready for all of this. He called it primary perception, and his claim was enormous. Plants, he said, weren't just alive, they were aware, tuned into the suffering of other creatures, and quietly reading the intentions of every person around them. In 1968, he published his findings, and the idea detonated. 5 years later, a book called The Secret Life of Plants took Backster's work and ran with it, straight into the mainstream. Suddenly, the whole world was talking to their ferns. People played classical music for their tomatoes and swore the fruit grew sweeter. They apologized to their gardens before pruning. There were whispers that plants could feel love, hold grudges, even remember the face of a person who had harmed them. It was a beautiful idea, a world where every living thing was quietly connected, where the daisy on your windowsill knew you and cared. There was just one problem. When actual scientists tried to reproduce Backster's results, nothing happened. This is where the myth should have died. Researchers at Cornell and other labs set out to repeat the experiments under real controls, with clean equipment and shielded rooms and no room for wishful thinking. And the plants just sat there. The needle didn't jump. The magic vanished the second anyone looked closely. The American Association for the Advancement of Science reviewed the claims and found them unsupportable. The verdict was blunt. Plants have no nervous system, no sense organs, no way to read a human mind. Primary perception wasn't a discovery, it was a mistake. So what was Backster actually seeing? The most likely answer is heartbreakingly ordinary. A polygraph is exquisitely sensitive to electrical noise, static in the air, tiny shifts in the moisture on a leaf, a person moving nearby, changes in the room itself, all of it can nudge that needle. Backster was a master at reading human charts, but a leaf is not a human, and he was almost certainly reading meaning into random static, seeing a face in the clouds. And that should have been the end of it. Plants don't scream. Case closed. Except it wasn't, because while Backster had the wrong answer, he'd stumbled onto a question that turned out to be real. He was just 50 years too early and looking in completely the wrong place. The truth wouldn't show up in the twitch of a lie detector. It would show up somewhere no one thought to look, at a frequency no human ear has ever heard. But before we get there, we have to deal with a harder question first. Forget mind reading, forget telepathy. Do plants even react when you cut them at all? In 2018, a team of scientists set out to watch a plant get hurt in real time. They took a small mustard plant and did something clever. They engineered it so that a certain protein inside would glow, would literally light up under a microscope whenever calcium moved through the plant's tissue. Calcium is one of the ways cells send signals. If the plant was doing anything internally when it got wounded, that glow would reveal it. Then they let a caterpillar loose on a leaf. You can watch the footage yourself. The caterpillar chews its way along the edge of the leaf, works toward the base, and takes one final bite. And the instant it does, a wave of green light explodes outward from the wound and races across the entire plant, leaf to leaf. Within a minute or two, parts of the plant far away from the injury are lit up like an alarm has gone off. Because an alarm had gone off. When the plant tissue tore, it leaked out a chemical called glutamate. And this is the part that stops people cold. Glutamate isn't some obscure plant compound. It's a neurotransmitter, one of the most important signaling molecules in your brain right now. The same class of chemical that fires between your neurons when you feel, when you think, when you react to pain. That leaked glutamate triggered the calcium wave, and that wave was a warning. It swept through the plant, telling every distant leaf the same thing. We're under attack. Start your defenses. And those leaves responded, ramping up chemical defenses to make themselves harder to eat. So let's be clear about what this means. A plant absolutely reacts when it's wounded. It senses the damage, it sounds an internal alarm, and it defends itself. That part is not a myth. That part is documented, filmed, and real. Which brings us right up against the question everyone actually wants answered. If a plant reacts like that, does it hurt? To feel pain, you need three things. You need pain receptors, the tiny sensors called nociceptors that detect damage. You need a nervous system to carry that signal, and you need a brain to turn that signal into the actual experience of suffering. Plants have none of them. No pain receptors, no nerves, nothing that even resembles a brain. There's nothing anywhere in their biology that could turn a signal into a feeling. And that distinction is everything, because reacting to damage and feeling pain are not the same thing. Your car's engine light reacts to a problem. It doesn't suffer. A smoke alarm screeches when it senses smoke, but nobody thinks the smoke alarm is afraid. That's what the calcium wave really is. It's the plant's smoke alarm, an automatic chemical response that protects the organism without anyone home to experience it. As one plant biologist put it, the whole business of feeling relies on having a brain, and plants simply don't have one. So on the question of pain, the science is about as settled as science gets. When you cut a plant, it does not feel agony. There's no one inside to feel it. You'd think that finally closes the case. Plants react, but they don't feel, so they can't possibly scream. And then, in 2023, a lab in Tel Aviv turned on a microphone and heard something that nobody was prepared for. For years, there had been a stubborn rumor floating around plant science. Some researchers suspected that plants under stress might vibrate in a way that made noise, but every attempt to prove it ran into the same wall. Nobody could show that these sounds actually traveled through the air, the way a real sound does. And if it doesn't travel through the air, it isn't a sound anyone or anything could ever hear. So a team led by researchers at Tel Aviv University decided to settle it for good. They built an acoustically sealed box and put it in a quiet basement, a room so silent it strips away every trace of background noise. Inside, they placed tomato and tobacco plants. Some had gone days without water. Some had just had their stems cut, and some were perfectly healthy, left completely alone as a comparison. Then they aimed ultra-sensitive microphones at them and listened. The healthy plants were nearly silent, on average less than one sound an hour, barely a whisper. But the stressed plants were a different story. The plants that had been cut, and the plants dying of thirst, were letting out sound after sound after sound, dozens of them every single hour. A freshly cut tomato plant popped off around 25 distinct clicks in 1 hour of recording. The plants were making noise, real, airborne, recordable noise, and the stressed ones were absolutely lighting up the microphones. So if plants are this loud, why has no gardener in human history ever heard a tomato scream? Because the sound lives in a place your ears can't go. Human hearing tops out somewhere around 20 kilohertz. Anything above that, and to you it simply does not exist. Total silence. The plants in that experiment were clicking at frequencies of 40 to 80 kilohertz, far above your ceiling. The sounds are physically there, filling the air, but they sail right over the top of everything you're capable of hearing. And that points to something strange. The researchers noted that a field of flowers, a place we think of as the definition of peace and quiet, might be crackling with sound, popping and clicking constantly, an entire hidden layer of noise, and we walk through it hearing nothing at all. But the discovery didn't stop at plants make noise. It got sharper. The team fed all those recordings into a machine learning model and asked it a harder question. Could a computer tell, just from the sound, what was wrong with the plant? It could. The model learned to listen to a click and correctly guess whether that plant was dying of thirst or had been physically cut. The sounds weren't random. They carried information about exactly what kind of stress the plant was under. At this point, it really does start to sound like screaming, a wounded plant crying out, telling anyone who can hear precisely how it's been hurt. So is that what this is? A scream? Here's where we finally get our answer, and it's not what the myth wants it to be. The clicks are real, but they are almost certainly not a cry. To understand why, you have to look at how a plant moves water. Inside every stem runs a network of microscopic pipes called the xylem, carrying water up from the roots. That water is under enormous tension, pulled upward in thin, delicate columns. When a plant gets cut, or when it's drying out, that tension spikes to a breaking point, and the water column snaps. In that instant, a tiny air bubble forms inside the pipe and collapses. That collapse sends out a sharp little shockwave. A pop. That's it. That's the sound. Scientists call the process cavitation, and it's pure physics. It's the same basic phenomenon that lets bursting bubbles chew through the metal on boat propellers and industrial pumps. There's no voice behind it, no intention, nothing that wants to be heard. It's the mechanical snap of a water pipe breaking under pressure, happening thousands of times inside a stressed plant. So the plant isn't crying out to be saved, it's not calling for help. The clicking is a byproduct, the physical sound of a plant's plumbing failing under strain. Which means the honest answer to our question has finally arrived. Let's put it all together, because now we can answer this cleanly. Does a plant make sound when you cut it? Yes. Provably, measurably yes. It releases a burst of ultrasonic clicks, far more than a healthy plant, and those clicks even carry information about the type of harm. That part is completely real, and for most of human history we had no idea. Does a plant feel that cut? No. There's no brain, no nerves, no pain receptors, nothing capable of turning damage into suffering. When you trim a hedge, nothing in there is in agony. And does a plant scream? No. Not in any way that word actually means. A scream is a deliberate cry of pain from something that hurts. What a plant produces is just the popping of collapsing water columns, physics with nobody behind it. But here's the twist the myth never saw coming, and it's the part worth remembering. Plants turned out to be far more active, far more alive than the myth ever imagined. They flood their own bodies with warning signals. They defend themselves. They fill the air with sound we're only now learning to hear, and those sounds don't vanish into nothing. Insects, bats, maybe even other plants may be listening, picking up information from a wounded plant and reacting to it. So no, the tomato in your kitchen isn't screaming in pain. But it is doing something we didn't even know was possible a few years ago. It's speaking in a language of clicks, in a frequency you'll never hear, in a conversation that's been happening all around you your entire life. The myth said plants feel your cruelty. The truth is quieter and somehow bigger. There's a whole hidden world of sound out there in the grass and the trees. We just spent all of human history unable to hear it. Cleve Backster had the wrong instrument, the wrong theory, and the wrong answer. But that one crazy night in 1966, staring at a jumping needle, he asked a question that turned out to be worth asking. It just took the world 50 more years, and a microphone that could hear the impossible to finally answer it. So the next time you walk across a lawn on a hot day, remember what's really happening under your feet. Not silence. A crackle of clicks and pops, an entire chorus of plants going off in a frequency built for ears that aren't yours.